At 9:47 a.m. on December 16, 1944, Corporal James Hendricks had 60 seconds before the Panther tank's main gun turned his foxhole into a crater. 42 tons of German steel grinding toward his position at 15 miles per hour. Range, 340 yards and closing. Hendricks was 23 years old, 8 months in combat. 0 Panther kills. The Germans had sent their 5th Panzer Army crashing through the Ardennes forest, in what would later be called the Battle of the Bulge. Hendricks's M1A1 bazooka weighed 13 pounds empty and could fire a 3.5-pound rocket at 265 feet per second. Against a Panther's frontal armor, it was effective at exactly one range, 80 yards or closer. The Panther's 75mm KWK-42 gun was effective at 2,000 yards. The math was brutally simple. If Hendricks fired now at 340 yards, his rocket would spark harmlessly off the Panther's sloped armor, revealing his position and achieving nothing. If he waited for killing range, the Panther's bow machine gun, already traversing, searching for targets, would find him first. By mid-December, the 28th Infantry Division had lost 11 bazooka teams trying to stop Panther advances. 11 two-man crews who fired at safe range and died watching their rockets bounce off. 11 teams who followed doctrine, engage at maximum effective range, fire, displace immediately. 11 funerals. The pattern never changed. Bazooka team spots Panther. Bazooka team fires at 150-200 yards, hoping for a mobility kill. Rocket fails to penetrate frontal armor. Panther commander locates launch signature. MG-42 machine gun cuts the crew down before they can reload. Command kept issuing the same tactical guidance. Engage armored targets from concealed positions at maximum effective range. Prioritize track and suspension targeting if frontal penetration is not achievable. But Hendricks had watched that guidance kill 3 crews in 2 days. Watched them fire from tree lines at 180 yards. Watched the rockets ricochet. Watched the Panthers swivel their turrets and execute good men who'd done everything right. Hendricks commanded a 2-man bazooka team, himself as gunner, and PF's Michael Torres, 19 years old, from El Paso, as his loader. Torres trusted Hendricks to keep them alive, trusted him to know when to fire and when to hold, trusted him to make the call that meant survival instead of becoming the 12th dead crew. But Hendricks had no answer for a Panther at 340 yards, no answer for frontal armor 7 inches thick at a 55-degree slope, no answer except watch it kill them or retreat and let it kill someone else. 5 nights earlier, Hendricks had been sitting in a frozen barn outside Bastogne, cleaning his bazooka by candlelight. The weapon lay disassembled on a wool blanket. Tube, grip assembly, wire stock, electrical firing mechanism. His hands were numb, his breath fogging in the December cold. He'd been thinking about the Panther problem for days. How do you kill a tank that outranges you by 1,900 yards? How do you get close enough to penetrate armor when the tank can see you coming and kill you before you're in range? Torres had been sitting across from him, eating cold hash from a tin. What if we just got closer before they saw us? Torres had asked. Can't, Hendricks said. Panthers travel with infantry screens. Spotters everywhere. The second we move into range, we're spotted. Torres scraped the bottom of his tin. What if they thought we already fired? Hendricks looked up. What? What if they thought we already shot at them and missed? Or that our bazooka broke? Torres gestured at the disassembled weapon. Like, what if we made them think we weren't dangerous anymore? And something clicked in Hendricks's brain. What if you didn't hide until you were in range? What if you let the Panthers see you, but made the commander think you were harmless? A bazooka team with a malfunctioning weapon wasn't a threat. It was a target of opportunity, easy kill. And tank commanders were aggressive, especially early in an engagement when they still felt invincible. If you could fake a misfire, make the Panther crew think your bazooka had jammed or failed to launch, the tank commander might advance to finish you off instead of standing back and shelling your position. Might bring that 42-ton beast into killing range voluntarily. Hendricks picked up the bazooka's grip assembly, turned it over in his hands. The firing mechanism was electrical. Trigger, contact, current to the rocket. If the contact failed, or appeared to fail, the rocket wouldn't launch. But what if you pretended the contact failed? What if you went through the entire firing sequence, aimed, triggered, everything, but didn't actually launch? Made it look like a dud rocket or a broken circuit? A Panther commander watching through his periscope would see a bazooka team aim, fire, and nothing. No launch signature, no rocket. Just a crew frantically working to clear a malfunction. That commander had two choices: reverse to safe distance and shell the position, or advance and machine gun the helpless crew before they could fix their weapon. Tank commanders were aggressive, especially Panthers, which had dominated every armor engagement in the Ardennes so far. Especially in the opening hours of an offensive, when momentum and speed mattered more than caution. If the ruse worked, the Panther would close distance, 60 yards, 50 yards, point-blank range where even frontal armor couldn't save it. It was insane. It violated every anti-armor doctrine in the U.S. Army Field Manual. Bazooka teams fired from concealment at maximum safe range, then displaced immediately. You never ever revealed your position without firing a live rocket. You never invited a tank to advance on you. You never gambled that the enemy would behave exactly the way you needed them to. That's how tank crews got killed. But Hendricks couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop seeing 11 dead crews who'd followed doctrine perfectly and died anyway. If you want to see if Hendricks's fake misfire gambit worked against a Panther, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because what happens next defies every rule of armored warfare. Back to Hendricks. He'd called Torres over that night in the frozen barn, showed him the disassembled firing mechanism, explained the idea. Torres stared at the bazooka parts for 30 seconds, his young face serious in the candlelight. Then he looked at Hendricks and asked one question: how do we fake it without actually breaking it? They'd spent 3 hours that night practicing. Hendricks would go through the firing sequence, shoulder the tube, acquire sight picture, call, clear backblast, squeeze the trigger, but his thumb would secretly depress the safety lock just before electrical contact. The trigger would click, the mechanism would seem to engage, but no current would flow. To anyone watching, it would look exactly like a misfire. Then Torres would rush forward, pretending to inspect the rocket, checking for dud indicators, selling the performance of a crew desperately trying to troubleshoot a weapon failure. 5 seconds of theater, maybe 10. Enough time for a tank commander to make a decision. Advance and kill the helpless crew, or waste a high-explosive shell on a foxhole. Hendricks was betting everything that the commander would choose to advance. 4 days later, Hendricks was about to find out if his barn-rehearsed gambit would save lives or get 2 men killed. The Panther was 320 yards out now, closing steady. Its turret swiveled slowly, scanning. The bow machine gun chattered in short bursts, suppressing nearby positions. Hendricks's hand moved to the bazooka tube. Time to try something that had never been done in combat. Time to find out if you could bluff a tank. Torres was pressed into the foxhole beside him, a live rocket already loaded, 2 more within arm's reach. His eyes were wide, but his hands were steady. "You ready?" Hendricks whispered. Torres nodded. "Let's sell it." Hendricks rose slightly from the foxhole, just enough to be visible. Just enough for the Panther's commander to see a bazooka team preparing to fire. He shouldered the tube, aligned the sight on the Panther's glacis plate, called out loud enough to be heard, "Back blast clear!" The Panther's turret snapped toward them. The commander had spotted them. 300 yards, still too far for a killing shot. Hendricks squeezed the trigger and simultaneously depressed the safety lock with his thumb. The firing mechanism clicked. Nothing launched. No rocket. No signature. No backblast. Just a metallic click and Hendricks cursing loudly, theatrically, "Misfire! Misfire!" Torres immediately lunged forward, hands on the rocket, pretending to check the ignition lead, selling the panic of a loader trying to troubleshoot a malfunction. Inside the Panther, 280 yards away, the commander was making a decision. Hendricks could almost feel the calculation happening. Helpless Bazooka crew. Weapon malfunction. Easy kill. The Panther's engine note changed. It surged forward. The tank was coming towards them. 240 yards. 200 yards. Torres was still working on the rocket, playing his part perfectly, glancing up at the advancing Panther with theatrical fear. 150 yards. Hendricks kept his face locked in frustration, cursing at the broken bazooka, selling helplessness while his peripheral vision tracked the tank's approach. 120 yards. The Panther's bow machine gun fired a burst that snapped over their foxhole, suppressing fire. The crew was confident now. 100 yards, still too far. Frontal armor at 100 yards was a dice roll. Torres's eyes flicked to Hendricks. How close? Hendricks kept his face locked in fake panic, but held up one finger. Wait, 80 yards. The Panther commander was committed now, rolling forward for the kill, probably already thinking about the next target. 70 yards. Hendricks's thumb released the safety lock. The firing mechanism was live. Torres stopped his troubleshooting performance and locked eyes with Hendricks. 65 yards. Point-blank range. The Panther's frontal armor had one weak point at this distance, the lower glacis plate, where the angle was less severe. Hendricks adjusted his aim 6 inches down, took a breath, and squeezed the trigger for real. James Hendricks had fired his first rifle at age 9, a .30-30 Winchester his uncle used for whitetail deer in the hill country outside San Antonio. The old man had taught him patience, taught him that rushing a shot meant missing, taught him that the animal you wanted never came when you called it. You had to make it want to come to you. By 16, Hendricks could call coyotes within 30 yards using nothing but a rabbit distress call and stillness. His uncle called it predator psychology, understanding what the animal wanted, then giving it permission to want you. He'd enlisted 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, driven by the same restless energy that drove half the boys in Texas. The Army had made him infantry, then selected him for anti-tank training at Fort Hood when they saw his rifle scores and noted exceptional patience under pressure on his evaluation. The M1A1 Bazooka was nothing like his uncle's Winchester. It weighed 13 pounds, fired a rocket instead of a bullet, and could theoretically punch through 3 inches of armor plate at 100 yards. The training sergeants loved it with an almost religious conviction. This weapon, Sergeant Kowalski had announced during their first day on the range, is the infantry's answer to the tank. Portable, devastating, and effective in the hands of a 2-man crew. Master it, and you master the battlefield. Hendricks had mastered it. He'd scored expert qualification, hitting stationary tank mock-ups at ranges from 50 to 200 yards. He'd learned to account for wind drift, trajectory drop, and the rocket's slight tendency to pull left after 30 yards. He'd learned to field strip the weapon blindfolded, to identify misfires, to troubleshoot electrical failures in the firing mechanism. But nothing in training had prepared him for the Ardennes in December. They'd arrived in early November, replacements for the 28th Infantry Division, which had been ground down in the Hurtgen Forest. The assignment was supposed to be quiet, a rest sector where green troops could acclimate to combat without facing Germany's best units. That illusion shattered on December 16th, when 3 Panzer divisions smashed through the American lines in the largest German offensive since 1940. Hendricks's company, 120 men dug into foxholes along a ridgeline overlooking a crossroads, suddenly found themselves in the path of the 5th Panzer Army's main thrust. Their orders were simple: hold the crossroads, delay the German advance, buy time for reinforcements. The 1st Panther had appeared at dawn, grinding up the forest road with 4 more behind it. American artillery had knocked out 2, but the remaining 3 had systematically destroyed every anti-tank position that revealed itself by firing. Hendricks had watched Staff Sergeant Kowalski's team fire at 180 yards. Textbook range, textbook technique. The rocket had bounced off the Panther's frontal armor. The tank's coaxial machine gun had killed both men before they could reload. He'd watched Corporal Chen's team try for a side shot from a concealed position at 140 yards. Good tactics. The rocket had struck a tree branch 15 feet from launch, detonating prematurely and killing Chen's loader instantly. He'd watched PFC Morrison's team fire and displace exactly as trained. The rocket had damaged the Panther's track, immobilizing it, a tactical success. But the tank's turret had remained operational, and it had shelled Morrison's displacement position with high-explosive rounds until nothing moved. 3 teams, 6 men, all dead before noon. Now it was Hendricks's turn. The 4th Panther was advancing on his position, and every instinct from training screamed at him to fire at maximum range and pray. But he'd seen where that led, seen the pattern, seen the bodies. Somewhere in his mind, his uncle's voice whispered, "You can't call the animal from far away, Jimmy. You got to make it want to come close." And Hendricks wondered, could you call a tank the way you called a coyote? Could you make it think you were wounded prey instead of a threat? The Panther was 340 yards out and closing. Time to find out if Predator psychology worked on German armor. The M1A1 Bazooka's technical manual, Field Manual 2330, was very specific about engagement ranges. Maximum effective range against armored vehicles, 300 yards. Optimum penetration range, 100 to 150 yards. Point-blank certainty, 50 to 80 yards. What the manual didn't mention was that maximum effective range assumed you were shooting at the side or rear armor of light tanks or the thin top armor of static positions. Against a Panther's frontal glacis plate, 7 inches of face-hardened steel sloped at 55 degrees, 300 yards might as well have been 3,000. Hendricks had learned this through observation, not training. He'd watched 11 rockets fired at Panthers in 3 days. He'd kept a mental log the way his uncle kept harvest records. Range, 220 yards. Target, frontal armor. Result, ricochet. Crew killed by return fire. Range, 180 yards. Target, frontal armor. Result, penetration failure. Crew killed. Range, 160 yards. Target, turret side. Result, deflection. Crew killed. Range, 140 yards. Target, glacis plate. Result, premature detonation on obstacle. Crew killed. The pattern was clear and brutal. At ranges over 100 yards, the bazooka's shaped charge warhead lacked sufficient velocity and impact angle to defeat Panther armor consistently. You might get lucky. You might hit a vision port or a weak weld. But luck wasn't a tactic. Below 100 yards, the mathematics changed. The rocket's penetration capability increased with proximity. More velocity retained, better impact angle achievable, larger weak points targetable. At 80 yards, you could aim for the lower glacis plate where the armor was slightly thinner and the slope less severe. At 60 yards, you could target the turret ring. At 40 yards, even a mediocre shot had a decent chance of achieving a mobility or firepower kill. But the Panthers didn't let the Bazooka teams get that close. Not if they saw you coming. Tank doctrine was simple. Stand off, use superior range and armor, destroy threats before they became dangerous. A Panther commander with any experience would halt at 200+ yards, scan for anti-tank positions, and shell anything suspicious. Infantry would sweep forward to flush out hidden teams. You never ever close to point-blank range with a known anti-tank position unless you had no choice. Which meant the only way to get a Panther into killing range was to make the commander think you weren't a threat anymore. Hendricks had started thinking about this on December 14th after watching Morrison's team die. That night, in the frozen barn that served as the company's reserve position, he'd sketched the problem in a notebook. Problem: Panther effective range equals 2,000 yards. Bazooka effective range equals 80 yards. Solution needed: close 1,920 yards without being killed. Constraints: Panthers stop advancing when threatened. Infantry screens prevent concealed approaches. Terrain offers limited cover. Question: what makes a Panther advance instead of stopping? He'd crossed out a dozen ideas. Flanking maneuvers, impossible without infantry support. Camouflaged positions closer to the road. Panthers were scanning constantly. Firing from extreme range to force them forward. They'd just shell you from standoff distance. Then Torres had made his offhand comment about pretending the bazooka was broken, and suddenly the equation had inverted. What if you didn't try to hide your threat? What if you revealed yourself as a threat, then immediately appeared to stop being a threat? A functional bazooka team was dangerous. A team with a malfunctioning weapon was just two scared infantrymen with a useless metal tube. Tank commanders were aggressive with helpless targets. It was human nature. You didn't waste ammunition on something that couldn't hurt you. You closed and finished it quickly. Hendricks had spent that night testing the theory mechanically. The bazooka's firing mechanism was electrical, a trigger that completed a circuit, sending current to an igniter in the rocket's motor. If the circuit didn't complete, the rocket wouldn't launch. The safety lock was designed to prevent accidental discharge. When depressed, it physically blocked the trigger's electrical contact. But the trigger still moved, still clicked, still felt like it was firing. If you squeezed the trigger while holding the safety lock down, the mechanism would go through all the motions of firing without actually launching the rocket. To anyone watching, especially through a tank's narrow periscope, it would look exactly like a misfire, a dud rocket, or a broken electrical system. The commander would see a bazooka team aim, trigger, and fail. Would see them panic, try to troubleshoot, become vulnerable. And then he'd have to make a choice: waste ammunition, shelling them, or advance and kill them quickly with machine gun fire before they fixed their weapon. Hendricks was betting that 9 times out of 10, the commander would advance, because that's what predators did when they saw wounded prey. His uncle had taught him that. The barn was freezing, their breath fogging white in the candlelight. Hendricks had cleared a space on the floor, 20 feet long, marked with stones to represent distances. One stone at 0, another at 80 yards, a third at 300 yards. "We run it until it's muscle memory," Hendricks said, "until you can sell the panic without thinking about it." Torres nodded, stamping his feet against the cold. He was young, 19, but he'd proven steady under fire. More importantly, he trusted Hendricks enough to try something insane. "Walk me through it again," Torres said. Hendricks positioned himself at the 0 mark with the bazooka tube. Panther appears at 300 yards. Eye shoulder, acquire sight pictures, and call clear backblast. You confirm clearly. "Clear backblast," Torres said. "I squeeze the trigger but hold the safety lock down with my thumb. The trigger clicks, but nothing launches." Hendricks demonstrated the mechanism producing a hollow click in the quiet barn. "The moment you hear that click without a launch, you move." Torres stepped forward, hands reaching for the imaginary rocket in the tube. I check the igniter lead first, then the rocket seating, selling panic the whole time. Exactly. You're not thinking about the tank. You're focused on the weapon like it's the only thing that matters. Panic, but controlled panic. You're troubleshooting, not freezing. They ran through it 5 times slowly, then 10 times at speed. Hendricks refined the timing. How long to troubleshoot before the tank would commit to advancing? Too short, and the commander might not believe the malfunction. Too long, and he'd just shell them from standoff range. 7 seconds. That felt right. 7 seconds of visible panic and frantic troubleshooting. Long enough to sell helplessness, short enough to force a quick decision. What if he doesn't advance? Torres asked. Then we're in the same position as every other Bazooka team, taking fire from a Panther at range. We displace and try something else. And if he does advance, we wait until he's at 80 yards or closer. Then I release the safety, and we fire for real. 1 shot, center mass on the lower glacis plate. Torres was quiet for a moment. 1 shot. If we miss, we don't miss, Hendricks said. Not at 80 yards, not with everything riding on it. They practiced the transition, from fake misfire to live firing. Hendricks would perform the false trigger pull. Torres would sell the troubleshooting. Then Hendricks would silently release the safety lock and reacquire his sight picture. 3 seconds from theater to lethal. The hardest part was maintaining composure while a 42-ton tank advanced on your position. That couldn't be practiced in a barn. That required either live combat or nerves of absolute steel. "You scared?" Torres asked during a break. Hendricks considered lying, then decided against it. Terrified. This works or we're dead. No middle ground. Could just do it the regular way, fire at 150 yards and hope we get lucky. We've seen how that ends. 11 crews, 11 failures. Torres nodded slowly. My older brother's a poker player. Used to tell me the secret to bluffing wasn't the cards. It was making the other guy believe you had cards. You think tank commanders play poker? Hendricks smiled despite the cold. I think they're human. And humans make predictable choices when they think they have the advantage. They practiced until the candle burned low and their hands were too numb to hold the bazooka steady. 23 repetitions. 23 perfect executions of a 7-second piece of theater that would either save their lives or get them killed. As they prepared to return to the line, Torres asked one more question. What do we tell the lieutenant? Hendricks had thought about this. Lieutenant Morrison commanded their platoon. A competent officer, but a by-the-book one. If Hendricks requested permission to try an unorthodox tactic that involved deliberately revealing his position and inviting a tank to advance, Morrison would refuse. Rightfully so. It violated every anti-tank doctrine in existence. We don't tell him, Hendricks said. We execute in combat, and if it works, we report it afterward. If it doesn't work, we won't be around to get court-martialed. Torres laughed, a short bark in the frozen air. That's the most Texas thing I've ever heard. My uncle used to say, better to ask forgiveness than permission, especially when asking takes too long and the deer's already moving. Your uncle sounds like he'd make a good infantryman. He would've, Hendricks agreed, but he's 63 and missing 2 fingers from a threshing accident. Army wouldn't take him. They walked back to the line through snow that crunched underfoot, carrying a bazooka and a plan that existed nowhere in official doctrine. Above them, the sky was clear and cold, full of stars that didn't care whether 2 soldiers lived or died tomorrow. But Hendricks cared, and Torres cared, and somewhere in the mathematics of desperation and innovation, they'd found an equation that might balance. The Panther would come, and when it did, they'd be ready to lie to it. The rocket launched with a flat whoosh and a back blast that filled the foxhole with acrid smoke. Hendricks didn't watch the flight. His eyes were already tracking the impact point, waiting for the fraction of a second that would tell him everything. The shaped charge warhead struck the Panther's lower glacis plate at 63 yards with a sound like a massive hammer hitting an anvil. A flash of white-hot plasma, a spray of molten metal, and then, critically, secondary detonations inside the tank. The Panther lurched to a stop. Smoke poured from the engine deck. The turret hatch flew open, and two crewmen scrambled out, abandoning the vehicle before the ammunition cooked off. Torres was already loading the second rocket, hands moving with mechanical precision despite the adrenaline flooding his system. But Hendricks raised a hand. "Hold. It's done." The Panther sat motionless on the road, smoke thickening, small flames visible through the vision ports. Not a catastrophic kill, but a firepower and mobility kill. The tank was done fighting. "Holy shit," Torres whispered. It worked. The bluff actually worked. Hendricks let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The Panther had closed from 300 yards to 63 yards because its commander had seen a helpless bazooka team with a malfunctioning weapon, had made the aggressive choice, had brought his invincible tank into killing range voluntarily. Predator psychology. It worked on coyotes. It worked on tanks. Across the radio net, Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled. "Hendricks, report. Did you just kill that Panther?" "Yes, sir. Mobility and firepower kill. Crew abandoned vehicle." A pause. Then, "From what range?" 63 yards, sir." Another pause, longer this time. 63 yards? How the hell did you let it get that close without firing? Hendricks and Torres exchanged a look. Here was the moment. Explain the unorthodox tactic or lie, and keep it simple. "Target was outside effective penetration range, sir," Hendricks said carefully. "Hold fire until a certain kill distance." It wasn't technically a lie, just an incomplete truth. Morrison seemed to accept it. "Good kill, Corporal. Stay alert. 2 more Panthers in the area, and they're going to be cautious now." The radio clicked off. Hendricks slumped back into the foxhole, suddenly aware of how badly his hands were shaking. Post-combat adrenaline crash. He'd seen it in others, never quite believed how physical it felt until now. "We should tell him," Torres said quietly, "about the fake misfire. If it works, other teams should know." "And say what? Hey, Lieutenant, we deliberately revealed our position and invited a tank to charge us?" He'd think we're insane. Maybe. Or maybe he'd think we found something that works. Before Hendricks could respond, the sound of tank engines rumbled from the forest road. The 2 remaining Panthers were advancing, but cautiously now. They'd seen one of their numbers burning. They'd be scanning for threats, coordinating with infantry, using proper suppression tactics. The bluff wouldn't work twice, not immediately. Tank commanders learned fast, and the sight of a burning Panther made everyone conservative. But Hendricks's mind was already racing ahead. The core principle, appearing helpless to draw the enemy closer, didn't require an identical execution. You could vary the performance, different types of malfunctions, different timing, different bait. Over the next 2 hours, the remaining Panthers probed the American line without committing to a full advance. They'd fire a few rounds, wait for return fire to reveal positions, then shell anything that looked threatening. Standard tactics. Cautious tactics. 3 more bazooka teams were engaged. 3 rockets fired at 140-plus yards. 2 ricochets, and 1 track hit that damaged but didn't stop the Panther. No kills, no teams lost, but no progress either. By nightfall, the Germans had withdrawn to regroup. The crossroads remained in American hands, barely. Lieutenant Morrison called a squad leaders meeting in the command post, a reinforced cellar in a half-destroyed farmhouse. Hendricks attended as acting squad leader after Sergeant Kowalski's death. Morrison looked exhausted, his face smudged with soot, and his eyes red-rimmed. Gentlemen, today was a near disaster. We stopped them, but just barely. The division says the Germans are massing for a major push tomorrow, at least a dozen tanks plus supporting infantry. We need better anti-tank performance or we're not going to hold this position. Around the cellar, tired faces nodded. Everyone had seen the Bazooka team's poor success rate. "Hendricks," Morrison said, "you scored the only Panther kill today. Walk us through your engagement. What did you do differently?" This was it. The moment to either share the innovation or keep it private. Hendricks thought about the 11 dead crews. Thought about tomorrow's attack. Thought about his uncle's voice. Good knowledge kept to yourself just becomes good regrets. "Sir, I used an unorthodox approach. Request permission to brief it fully." Morrison gestured. "Proceed." Hendricks explained the fake misfire tactic, the safety lock manipulation, the 7 seconds of theater, the calculated bet that tank commanders would advance on apparently helpless targets. He explained the barn rehearsals with Torres, the predator psychology theory, the mathematics of effective range versus killing range. The cellar was silent when he finished. Finally, Staff Sergeant Chen, whose brother had died that morning, spoke up. "That's either brilliant or the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You're gambling that the tank commander makes exactly the choice you need." "Not gambling," Hendricks corrected. "Playing odds. Predators are predictable when they see wounded prey. It's instinct. And tank commanders are still human." "It worked once," Morrison said slowly. "That doesn't make it doctrine." "No, sir. But doing the same thing that got 11 crews killed doesn't seem like a better option." Morrison stared at him for a long moment. Then, "All right. Tomorrow, if we face another armor assault, you have permission to use your tactic. But, Corporal, if it gets your team killed, I'm going to feel terrible about approving it." "Understood, sir. And Hendricks, you'd better teach it to the other Bazooka teams. If this works, we need more than one crew who can execute it." Teaching the fake misfire tactic to soldiers who'd spent months drilling orthodox procedures was harder than Hendricks expected. The instinct to fire at maximum range, to engage the threat as soon as possible, was drilled bone-deep into every anti-tank gunner. The idea of deliberately not firing, of inviting the tank closer, violated every survival instinct. Corporal Davies, who commanded 2nd Squad's Bazooka team, was particularly skeptical. He was 31, older than most infantrymen, a veteran of North Africa who'd killed 2 Italian tanks with textbook-perfect flank shots at 180 yards. "You're asking me to let a Panther get within spitting distance," Davies said, arms crossed. "Based on a theory about coyotes your uncle taught you." "Based on one successful combat test," Hendricks corrected. "And the theory that tank commanders make predictable choices. Tank commanders also have machine guns that'll cut you in half if they suspect anything. Only if they suspect. The whole point is selling the malfunction so completely they don't suspect it." They were in the barn again. Hendricks had requested it as a training space. 4 Bazooka teams. 8 men, all watching him with varying degrees of doubt. Private First Class Kelly, Davies's loader, spoke up. "What's the tell? How do we know if the tank's buying it or if the commander's about to light us up?" "Engine note," Hendricks said. "If the Panther maintains speed or accelerates, the commander's committed to closing. If it slows or stops, he's suspicious. That's when you displace immediately. And if we guess wrong? Same result as every other Bazooka engagement where you reveal your position. You're under fire and need to be displaced. The difference is, if you guess right, the tank comes into the killing range voluntarily." Staff Sergeant Chen, who'd been silent until now, stepped forward. "Show us. Full demonstration with timing." Hendricks and Torres ran through the complete sequence. Acquisition, false trigger, troubleshooting performance, safety release, real shot. They executed it 3 times at full speed, then broke it down step by step for the other teams. The mechanical part was simple enough. Every gunner could manipulate the safety lock while triggering. The performance part was harder. Selling panic convincingly while maintaining tactical awareness and tracking the tank's approach required a strange dual mindset. Actor and soldier simultaneously. Davies tried it twice, and both times his panic looked wooden, performative. Kelly was better. His troubleshooting movements had genuine franticness. "It's not about acting," Hendricks explained. "It's about channeling real fear into useful movement. You're actually scared. Use that. Just direct it into checking the rocket instead of freezing or firing prematurely." They drilled for 3 hours. By the end, all 4 teams could execute the basic technique, though only 2, Hendricks and a team led by Corporal Ramos, looked smooth doing it. That night, Lieutenant Morrison pulled Hendricks aside. "You know what you're creating here, right?" "Sir?" "A doctrine change. If this works, if multiple teams successfully execute it, you're fundamentally changing how we engage armor. That doesn't happen often, and when it does, it usually comes from generals and think tanks, not corporals with hunting stories." Hendricks didn't know what to say to that. Morrison continued, "I'm backing you because we're desperate, and because your logic is sound. But understand that if this goes wrong, if we lose teams because they're trying your tactic, the after-action review is going to be brutal, for both of us." "I understand, sir." "Do you? Because I've been in this army long enough to know that innovation is celebrated when it works, and punished when it fails. There's no middle ground." "Then we'd better make sure it works, sir." Morrison smiled thinly. "That's the spirit. Get some sleep, Corporal. Tomorrow's going to be heavy." But Hendricks didn't sleep. He lay in his foxhole staring at the frozen sky, thinking about what Morrison had said. He'd stumbled into something larger than a simple tactical trick. He'd challenged doctrine, suggested that the manual's approach to anti-tank engagement was incomplete. If tomorrow went well, his idea might spread, might save lives across the division, maybe across the whole theater. If tomorrow went poorly, he'd be responsible for deaths, for teams who tried his method and died because they waited too long, or performed too poorly, or just got unlucky. The weight of that was staggering. Torres's voice came from the darkness. "You awake? Yeah? Thinking about tomorrow?" "About all the tomorrows," Hendricks admitted. "About what happens if this works or doesn't." Torres was quiet for a moment. "My brother? The poker player? He told me once that the worst players are the ones who won't make a big bet because they're scared of looking stupid. Said the best players bet big when the math supports it, regardless of how it looks. This isn't poker. No, stakes are higher. But the principle's the same, isn't it? You found math that supports the bet. Now you make it and see what the cards show." Hendricks smiled in the darkness. "Your brother sounds smart." "He is. I wish he was here instead of me." "I'm glad you're here, Torres." "Yeah, me too. Mostly." They lapsed into silence. 2 soldiers waiting for dawn, and whatever it would bring. The German armor came at 08:47 hours. 9 tanks in a staggered column with at least a company of infantry moving through the trees on either flank. Not a probe this time. A full assault meant to smash through the American line and seize the crossroads. Hendricks watched them approach through morning mist, counting silhouettes. 6 Panthers in the main column, 3 Panzer IVs in support. American artillery opened up immediately, heavy shells screaming overhead to impact in the German rear. 2 Panthers took hits, 1 catastrophic kill, 1 mobility damaged, but the rest kept coming, 300 yards and closing. Lieutenant Morrison's voice across the radio net. "All Bazooka teams, weapons free. Execute at your discretion. Hendricks, Davies, Ramos, you're cleared for your alternative approach. Everyone else, standard doctrine." 4 teams, Four different tactical approaches about to collide with reality. Hendricks shouldered his bazooka, watching a panther grind directly toward his position. 280 yards. Perfect setup for the bluff. The tank was advancing aggressively. Commander probably feeling invincible after breaking through the artillery barrage. Torres, ready? Ready. 250 yards. Hendricks aligned his sight picture on the glasses plate, his thumb already on the safety lock. Beside him, Torres positioned himself to sell the troubleshooting performance. Clear back blast, Hendricks called. Clear, Torres confirmed. 220 yards. Hendricks squeezed the trigger while depressing the safety lock. Click. No launch. Torres immediately lunged forward, hands on the rocket, his voice rising in perfect panic. Misfire! Check the igniter! Check the… Inside the advancing Panther, the commander was making his decision. The tank's engine note changed, surging forward, accelerating. He'd bought it. 190 yards. The Panther's bow machine gun chattered, but the fire was suppressive, not aimed. The commander wanted to close quickly, finish the helpless crew before they could fix their weapon. 150 yards. Hendricks kept his face locked in frustration, his hands making small adjustments to the tube as if trying to troubleshoot while Torres worked the rocket. 100 yards. The Panther was committed now, rolling at full speed. Hendricks's thumb silently released the safety lock. The firing mechanism was live. He reacquired his sight picture. Lower glasses plate, center mass. 75 yards. Torres's eyes flicked to him. Now? Not yet? 60 yards. The Panther's commander probably starting to question his decision, probably reaching for the turret traverse controls. Hendricks squeezed the trigger for real. The rocket launched with a flat crack and crossed 60 yards in less than a second. Impact on the lower glacis plate, slightly left of center. The shaped charge punched through the armor and detonated inside the crew compartment. The Panther's engine coughed once and died. Smoke poured from every opening. One down. But Hendricks didn't have time to celebrate, because 200 yards to his left, Davies was executing his own bluff against a different Panther. Hendricks watched the sequence unfold. Fake misfire, troubleshooting panic, the Panther accelerating forward. But something was wrong. Davies's performance looked forced, mechanical, and the Panther wasn't closing as aggressively. It was advancing but cautiously, its turret traversing to scan for threats. The tank commander was suspicious. Davies, displace, Hendricks shouted across the radio. He's not buying it. Displace now. But Davies held position, committed to the bluff, waiting for the perfect range. The Panther was at 110 yards when its turret stopped traversing, aimed directly at Davies's foxhole. The main gun fired. The high-explosive shell impacted 5 feet from Davies's position. The blast threw both Davies and Kelly from their foxhole, their bazooka tumbling away into the snow. Kelly didn't move. Davies tried to crawl. His leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Hendricks cursed and was halfway out of his foxhole before Torres grabbed his shoulder. You can't! The Panther's still a second American bazooka rocket, fired from Corporal Ramos's position 80 yards to the right, struck the Panther in the turret side. Penetration. The tank ground to a halt, the turret frozen mid-traverse. Ramos's voice on the radio, breathless. Got him! Davies, sit tight! Medics coming! 2 Panthers down. 7 enemy tanks remained. And the Germans were learning. The other Panther commanders had seen 2 of their number destroyed at close range. They were halting at 200-plus yards now, scanning carefully, coordinating their fire. The bluff wouldn't work again. Not this engagement. The Germans had adapted. But 300 yards north, the 3rd Bazooka team, led by a corporal named Flynn, was trying something different. Hendricks watched through binoculars as Flynn and his loader deliberately exposed themselves, running between positions as if fleeing. A Panzer IV tracked them, machine gun chattering. Flynn dove into a foxhole. But it wasn't his original position. It was a forward position, 40 yards closer to the German line. The Panzer IV, focused on the fleeing crew, rolled forward to get a better angle on the foxhole. Right into killing range. Flynn rose from the forward foxhole and fired at 70 yards into the Panzer IV's flank. Clean kill. The tank slewed sideways and stopped, smoke pouring from the turret hatches. 3 down. Morrison's voice on the radio. All teams, hold positions. Infantry advancing on our right flank. Shift fire to support. The battle dissolved into chaos. German infantry pressed forward using the remaining tanks as cover. American riflemen engaged from foxholes and fighting positions. Mortar rounds impacted across the tree line. Smoke and noise and confusion. Through it all, Hendricks kept tracking the remaining German armor, looking for opportunities. But the Panther commanders had learned caution. They stayed at range, provided fire support for their infantry, refused to be baited closer. The bluff had worked spectacularly, until the enemy adapted. Now it was useless. But Flynn's improvisation, using apparent retreat to lure the tank forward, had worked once. Could that be replicated? The engagement lasted 90 minutes. When it finally ended, German forces withdrawing to regroup after losing 4 tanks and taking heavy infantry casualties, the American line still held. Barely. Hendricks found Davies in the aid station, his legs splinted, his face gray with pain and morphine. "I fucked it up," Davies said before Hendricks could speak. "The performance. I was thinking too hard. The tank commander saw through it." "You tried something new under fire," Hendricks replied. "That takes guts." "Kelly?" Davies's face tightened. "Didn't make it. Blast caught him full on." Another name, another funeral, another weight of innovation's price. By December 20th, word of the fake Misfire tactic had spread beyond Hendricks's company. Other units facing German armor assaults started experimenting with their own variations, not exact copies of Hendricks's technique, but adaptations based on the core principle. Appear vulnerable to draw the enemy into killing range. Some teams faked crew injuries, others staged equipment failures visible from a distance. One enterprising team deliberately set off a smoke grenade near their position, then fired through the smoke at a Panther that advanced to investigate what appeared to be a knocked-out position. The Germans adapted too. By the 5th day of the Bulge, Panther commanders had learned to be suspicious of any Bazooka team that didn't fire immediately. They'd shell suspicious positions from standoff range, use infantry to scout ahead, coordinate overlapping fields of fire to prevent close approaches. The tactic's initial effectiveness, 90% success rate in the first 3 engagements, dropped to roughly 40% by December 21st. But 40% was still better than the alternative. Standard Bazooka engagements against Panther frontal armor at 150-plus yards had roughly a 15% success rate based on division statistics. The fake Misfire approach and its variations were still killing tanks at nearly 3 times the baseline. Lieutenant Morrison called another meeting on December 22nd. Hendricks attended along with representatives from 3 other companies who'd been using variations of the tactic. Morrison laid out the situation. "Gentlemen, you've created something the Germans are now actively countering. That's both good news. It means it was effective enough to warrant a response. And bad news. It means we need to evolve faster than they can adapt." Thoughts? Captain Weinberg from Charlie Company spoke first. "The Germans are using combined arms now. Tanks stay back. Infantry moves forward to flush out our positions. We need a counter to their counter." "My team tried firing at extreme range deliberately," said a sergeant from Baker Company. "Missed on purpose to make the tank think we were panicking or poorly trained. Worked once, commander got cocky and closed to help his infantry. Didn't work the second time." Hendricks had been thinking about this problem for 3 days. "Sir, the bluff only works if the German commander believes he has the advantage. Once they got cautious, we lost that psychological edge. But what if we layer the deception? Explain, Morrison said. Right now, we're using single-layer bluffs. Fake malfunction, fake injury, fake retreat. The Germans have seen all of those. But what if we combine them? Use multiple teams to stage a scenario. One team appears to malfunction, while a second team provides visible covering fire, drawing attention. The tank focuses on the second team while the first fixes their malfunction and waits for close range. Around the table, heads nodded slowly. Or, Hendricks continued, we use the terrain differently. Stage the malfunction in a position that looks vulnerable but actually has overlapping fields of fire from concealed secondary positions. Tank advances on what looks like an isolated, helpless crew and drives into a crossfire. Captain Weinberg leaned forward. You're describing integrated anti-tank teams. Coordinated positions with primary and secondary firing points using deception to control enemy movement into a kill zone. Yes, sir. That requires training we don't have time for, and coordination across multiple teams who might not trust each other's timing. Respectfully, sir, we didn't have time to train the basic fake misfire either. We learned it under fire and adapted. This is the same principle. Use what works, refine quickly, and stay ahead of German counter-tactics. Morrison tapped the table thoughtfully. The regimental S2 briefed yesterday that German armor doctrine is shifting. They're taking fewer risks, using their tanks as mobile artillery instead of assault vehicles. If we can reverse that, if we can force them back into aggressive tactics where our bluffs work, we regain the advantage. How do we force that? Someone asked. Hendricks had an answer, though he wasn't sure Morrison would like it. We make them angry. Make them want revenge. Kill a high-value tank in a way that's humiliating. Maybe a bluff that's so obvious it becomes an insult. Provoke them into making mistakes. The room went silent. Finally, Morrison smiled, a grim expression. Corporal Hendricks, you have a deeply devious mind. I'm not sure if that's a compliment or a concern. Little of both, sir. All right, here's what we're going to do. Each company will designate one bazooka team as primary deception, one as concealed support. We'll coordinate firing positions and signals. And Hendricks, since this is your brainchild, you get to be the bait for the first coordinated attempt. Understood, sir. Over the next 2 days, they drilled the coordinated approach. Hendricks would stage a highly visible fake malfunction in a forward position. Corporal Ramos would be concealed 90 yards to the right with a clear field of fire on Hendricks's approach vector. A third team under Sergeant Chen would cover the left approach. The trap was set. They just needed a Panther aggressive enough or angry enough to spring it. That opportunity came on December 24th, Christmas Eve, when a lone Panther pushed forward during a reconnaissance in force. The tank was cautious, stopping frequently to scan, its commander clearly experienced. Hendricks let the Panther get to 280 yards, then deliberately exposed his position. Shouldering the bazooka with exaggerated movements that screamed inexperienced crew. He went through the fake misfire sequence, but this time he added flourishes, dropped the rocket, had Torres trip while trying to reload, made it look like a comedy of errors, a crew so incompetent they were barely a threat. Inside the Panther, the commander made his decision. The tank surged forward, not cautiously but aggressively, almost contemptuously. The commander had seen a helpless, bumbling crew and decided to crush them quickly. 220 yards. Hendricks kept up the performance, fumbling with the rocket, Torres gesturing wildly. 150 yards. The Panther was rolling fast now. 100 yards. Hendricks dropped the rocket again. Torres threw his hands up in theatrical frustration. 75 yards. The Panther's bow machine gun opened fire, kicking up snow around the foxhole. And then Corporal Ramos, from his concealed position 90 yards to the right, fired into the Panther's exposed flank at a perfect 90-degree angle. The rocket penetrated the side armor and detonated inside the crew compartment. Secondary explosions followed, ammunition cooking off. The Panther died without its commander ever seeing Ramos's position. Hendricks lowered his bazooka, still unfired, and let out a breath. The layered deception had worked perfectly. Not because the German commander was stupid, but because human nature made predictable choices when presented with apparently vulnerable prey. His uncle had been right about that, too. The after-action report that Lieutenant Morrison submitted on December 27, 1944, was 12 pages long. It detailed the fake misfire tactic, its variations, success rates, German counter-tactics, and the evolution toward coordinated deception-based anti-tank operations. The report went to regiment, then to division, then, somehow, to 3rd Army Headquarters. On January 3, 1945, a staff officer from 12th Corps arrived at Hendricks's position with orders to report to Division HQ for debriefing. Torres went with him, nervous about leaving the line. The debriefing lasted 6 hours. 3 colonels, 2 majors, and a civilian analyst from the War Department asked Hendricks and Torres to explain every detail of their technique. They demonstrated with a training bazooka, answered questions about timing, performance, psychological theory, and success rates. The civilian, a thin man named Dr. Patterson, who'd apparently taught psychology at Princeton before the war, was particularly interested in the predator-prey dynamic. "You're describing applied behavioral psychology," Patterson said. "Using the opponent's cognitive biases, specifically the tendency to underestimate wounded or malfunctioning threats, to manipulate their tactical decisions. It's sophisticated." "It's hunting," Hendricks replied. "Just bigger game than coyotes." Patterson smiled. "Perhaps, but the implications are significant. If this approach works against armor, what about other applications? Infantry assaults, defensive positions, even strategic deception?" Colonel Marsh, the Division G3, cut in. "Let's stay focused on the immediate application. Corporal, how quickly can this be taught to replacement crews?" 2 hours for the basic technique, sir. Another 4 hours for the coordinated variations. Most of the learning happens in actual combat, reading the tank commander's decision-making, adjusting the performance based on his reactions. Can it be written into a training manual? Hendricks hesitated. The mechanics, yes. The psychology, the feel of when to commit versus when to displace, that's harder to teach on paper. Try anyway. We're updating Field Manual 2330 to include unconventional anti-tank approaches. Your technique will be Section 7, Deception-Based Engagement Tactics. I need you to write the initial draft. Over the next week, Hendricks worked with Morrison and Patterson to formalize what had been intuitive into something teachable. They created decision trees. If the tank does X, you do Y. They quantified timing, 7 seconds of troubleshooting performance, not more than 10. They detailed variations and when to use each. The draft manual section was 17 pages. It included diagrams, safety warnings, and a prominent note. This technique involves deliberately revealing your position and inviting enemy advancement. It carries significant risk and should only be attempted by experienced crews with strong tactical awareness and nerve discipline. By February, copies were being distributed to anti-tank schools and replacement training centers. By March, bazooka crews across the European theater were learning the Hendricks technique, though most knew it as the fake misfire or wounded prey tactic. The official adoption brought validation, but also pressure. Hendricks received letters from crews who'd successfully used the technique, thanking him, describing their kills, sharing their own innovations. But he also heard about failures. Teams who'd tried the bluff, misjudged timing, and died. 3 confirmed deaths in February alone. Each death hit Hendricks like a personal failure. He'd created this, made it official doctrine. And now men were dying because they'd tried his idea and either performed it poorly or just got unlucky. Morrison found him one night in March, sitting alone outside the company command post, staring at a letter from a widow whose husband had been killed attempting the fake misfire tactic. "You can't carry that," Morrison said quietly. "Can't I? I wrote the manual, made it official. You found something that works more often than it fails. That's all any tactician can do. The men who died using your technique, some would have died anyway using standard tactics. Some died because they made mistakes. That's not on you." "Feels like it is." Morrison sat down beside him. "Here's what I know. Since your technique was adopted, division anti-tank kill rates against Panthers increased by 140%. That's not speculation. That's S2 confirmed data. More importantly, crew survival rates increased by 67%. Your idea is saving more lives than it costs, by a significant margin." Hendricks wanted to believe that. "I wanted to focus on the lives saved rather than the ones lost." But the widow's letter sat heavy in his pocket. "The Army's putting you in for a Bronze Star," Morrison continued, "for innovation under combat conditions resulting in tactically significant doctrine advancement. It'll probably get approved." "I don't want a medal for this." "Tough. You're getting one anyway." "Because what you did matters, Hendricks. You saw a problem, created a solution, and had the guts to test it when it mattered. That's what wins wars." The Bronze Star citation arrived in April. Hendricks read it once, then put it in his footlocker and tried not to think about it. What mattered more was a letter from the division that confirmed the fake misfire tactic and its variations had been used successfully 127 times between December and March, resulting in 89 confirmed tank kills and an estimated 160-plus crew survivals. 160 men who came home because Hendricks had remembered his uncle's lessons about calling coyotes. Maybe Morrison was right. Maybe that was enough. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Corporal James Hendricks, promoted to sergeant 2 weeks prior, was in a small German town east of the Rhine, drinking captured schnapps with Taurus and what remained of their company. Of the original 120 men who'd held the crossroads in December, 47 had made it to VE Day. 73 empty places, 73 names on the casualty lists. But as they drank and tried to process survival, Hendricks couldn't help calculating the deeper mathematics. The fake misfire tactic had spread across multiple divisions. Hundreds of teams had used it. Thousands of engagements over 5 months. How many of those survivors owed their lives, at least partially, to a technique born in a frozen barn, with a bazooka and a memory of hunting coyotes? The numbers were unknowable, but they existed somewhere in the invisible ledger of war. Lives saved, families kept whole, futures preserved. Torres raised his cup in a toast. To go home. "Going home," Hendricks echoed. After mustering out in July, Hendricks returned to Texas. The hill country looked exactly the same. Same scrub oak, same rocky soil, same endless sky. His uncle was older, grayer, but still hunting coyotes with his 30-30 and his rabbit call. They went hunting together in September, sat in a blind at dawn waiting for a coyote to respond to the distress call. The technique was exactly as Hendricks remembered. Make the predator think you're wounded prey. Make them want to come close. Then take the shot when they're certain kill range. "Worked in Germany, too," Hendricks said quietly. His uncle nodded. "Figured it might. Predators are predators, whether they got 4 legs or drive tanks." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun rose over the hills. Eventually, a coyote appeared, circling cautiously, ears forward. Drawn by the promise of easy prey, Hendricks's uncle let it close to 40 yards, closer than necessary, but he'd always been a teacher before a hunter, then took the shot. Clean kill. The coyote dropped without knowing what hit it. "Patience," his uncle said. "That's what I taught you. Let them come to you. Control when the engagement happens. Make them think it's their idea." "You taught me more than hunting," Hendricks replied. His uncle smiled. "Good knowledge is never wasted. Just sometimes get used in ways you don't expect." Hendricks worked various jobs over the next few years: ranch hand, truck driver, eventually a foreman at a construction company. He didn't talk much about the war. Most veterans didn't. But in 1950, when the Korean War broke out and a new generation of soldiers faced enemy armor, Hendricks received a letter from the Department of the Army. They were updating anti-tank training for the M20 Super Bazooka and wanted to incorporate lessons from the European theater. Would he be willing to consult? He spent 2 weeks at Fort Hood teaching the fake Misfire technique to instructors who'd teach it to replacement crews headed to Korea. The core principles hadn't changed: appear vulnerable, control enemy decision-making, engage at point-blank certainty, but the applications evolved with new weapons and new enemies. One young lieutenant, fresh from West Point, asked the question Hendricks had been expecting. "Sergeant Hendricks, how did you come up with this? What made you think it would work?" Hendricks thought about that for a moment. About matchsticks and barn rehearsals, about desperation and innovation, about 11 dead crews and the math that said doing the same thing meant dying the same way. "I had a good teacher," he finally said, "and I paid attention to how predators think." The technique lived on through Korea, then Vietnam, adapted for new weapons and new tactical situations. The specific application changed. You didn't fake misfire a TOW missile the same way you did a bazooka, but the principle remained: appear vulnerable to draw the enemy into killing range. In 1978, at age 56, Hendricks received an invitation to speak at the infantry school at Fort Benning. They were opening a new exhibit on tactical innovation, and his fake misfire technique was being featured as a case study in field-expedient doctrine development. The exhibit included his original after-action report, now declassified, photos from the Ardennes, and a testimonial section where veterans who'd used the technique shared their stories. Hendricks stood in front of the display, reading letter after letter from soldiers who'd survived because they'd learned to bluff tanks. One letter in particular caught his attention, from a master sergeant who'd used the technique in Vietnam and credited it with saving his entire platoon during an NVA armor ambush. "My crew survived," the letter concluded, "because some corporal in World War II remembered how to hunt coyotes. Please tell him thank you if you can find him." The museum curator, standing beside Hendricks, said, "We estimate your technique contributed to approximately 340 confirmed tank kills across 3 wars, and potentially saved upwards of 2,000 crew members who would have been lost using conventional engagement tactics. That's a remarkable legacy, Sergeant." 2,000 lives. The number was overwhelming. Hendricks thought about Torres, about Morrison, about all the men who'd refined and spread the technique. Thought about his uncle teaching patience in a blind at dawn. Thought about a frozen barn and a desperate idea that shouldn't have worked but did. "It wasn't just me," Hendricks said. "It was Torres selling the performance. Morrison backed the idea. Ramos and Flynn and all the others who tried variations and made them work. I just started it." "That's what innovation is," the curator replied. "Someone starts it, others build on it, and eventually it becomes bigger than any one person." Hendricks died in 1992 at age 70, surrounded by children and grandchildren who knew him as a quiet man who'd worked construction and told hunting stories. His obituary mentioned his Bronze Star and his role in developing an anti-tank tactic. But most people in his small Texas town didn't know the details. But at Fort Benning, the exhibit remained. And in field manuals and tactical training courses, the principles he'd discovered lived on. Adapted, evolved, refined for new weapons and new wars, but still fundamentally based on the idea that predators make predictable choices when they see wounded prey. The M1A1 bazooka he'd used was long since destroyed or scrapped. The barn where he'd rehearsed was torn down decades ago. But the knowledge persisted, passed from instructor to student, from veteran to rookie, from one generation of soldiers to the next. And somewhere in that transmission of knowledge, in the invisible thread connecting a Texas coyote hunter to an Ardennes foxhole, to a Korean hilltop, to a Vietnamese jungle, to every future battlefield where the principle might apply, James Hendricks's legacy lived on, not as fame, not as glorious, just as the quiet mathematics of survival, multiplied across time, saving lives in ways that could never be fully counted. His uncle would have called that good knowledge, well used. Hendricks would have agreed. The end?